All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. We are so excited to have you. There's been a lot of buzz about this particular webinar, so we're just really excited to get things moving. So today is the top Salesforce tips for M&A events, and we're just so pumped to have everyone here. So thank you for joining. What I'd like to say real quick before we get going is that I'm sure there will be questions out there. There are going to be people who want to raise their hand and say something. So if you do have something to ask, please wait until the end. Put it in the chat, put it in the question and answer box, and we will definitely get to it because we want to make sure that we answer everyone's questions and we get everything done. But we also want to be wise about the time that we're spending as well, because we want to make sure we finish on time, get everyone back to work for the day. So thank you so much for coming once again. My name is Andrew. I am the Senior Partner Account Manager for Cloud Adoptions, and I'll be hosting today. So first up, we have our amazing panel of hosts. They are absolutely incredible. We have a really huge powerhouse trio today that are going to be speaking to you. So first up, we have Laurie Barkman. She is the founder of Small.Big. She has more than 20 years experience and works with business owners to maximize enterprise value, create succession plans, and identify M&A strategies. So perfect for this webinar today. She also represents both buy-side and sell-side engagements as an M&A advisor with Stony Hill Advisors. Sorry. She has an MBA from Carnegie Mellon University and a BS degree from Cornell. She's also a certified value build advisor and has a certificate in exit planning from the Exit Planning Institute. So perfect today. Thank you so much for joining, Laurie. We also have Shannon Gregg, PhD. She is the only person in the world to have a PhD in Salesforce adoption. She is a Salesforce expert. That is true. She is the only one. She is the owner, founder, and 100% president of Cloud Adoption Solutions. And she is a great mentor to me as well. So thank you so much for joining us today, Shannon. Natalie is the head of operations, client discovery at Cloud Adoption Solutions. She has 15 years of sales operations and with a focus of Salesforce administration, and she's just a huge expert in the field. So we are so excited to have you guys on board today. So one more time, please put your questions in the box if you have them, and we'll go ahead and get started with Laurie.
Thank you so much, Andrew and Natalie and Shannon, for hosting today's conversation. I'm excited to be here. I'm excited to talk with all of you about this topic and keying up on what are some ways to make M&A events successful. That's a really big statement. I totally get it. As someone who works on both sides, both buy side and sell side, I've had experience also as a CEO with an exit, and we were a Salesforce customer. So from that perspective too, I think it's a really important conversation. I'm going to highlight just a few things in my bio. If you could just switch forward for me, please. Just a few things here. As mentioned, I'm the founder of Small.Big. Again, it's a consultancy to help business owners see their pathway forward, thinking forward about a transition. How do we increase value now and plan ahead? And then also, when you're ready to make that transition, I work with you on those transactions as an M&A advisor. I also am an adjunct professor at Carnegie Mellon, and I love talking with people about theoretical things, but it's really this blend of making ideas actionable. And so that's what we hope to do for you today, is give you some things to think about, give you some actionable steps to take with you. Next, please. So I'll just tee it up in this section, talking about where we are today and our economy. Even before the pandemic, the story goes that many S&P 500 companies are no longer around. This probably doesn't shock you. There's some big names that are no longer around. If you remember Blockbuster as a primary example, but Kodak is another one. Too big to fail? No, not anymore. And the cohort of companies from the 1950s, right? It used to have a lifespan of around 50 years, and now it's shortened up to about 17. What will this look like given the 2020 pandemic? We'll see. It might be even shorter. So that's the environment we're in. Next, please. And also in this environment, because of disruption, because of market, economic, customer disruption, there's a lot of changes happening. But this Harvard Business Review article highlighted that a lot of times we think that disruption comes from technology. So as new technologies come around, it's one of the main reasons why a company would be disrupted. Again, pointing to the Blockbuster Netflix challenge. But ultimately, it's about customers and knowing where their tastes are moving. And so how do we look at that in terms of continued innovation and being in touch with what our customers need to ensure our business is going to be around in the future? Next, please. One of the ways that we think about this is about innovation. And this again is from a Harvard Business Review article that highlights the different ways that companies can innovate. And so how can M&A amplify these strategies and help change the trajectory, particularly if your company is challenged with market disruption and sort of losing sight of what's important along the way? It's very difficult. I'm making these lofty statements, right? But we all know this is a really challenging thing. And this particular chart is highlighting that there are different ways to think about innovation. If you're launching something new that's really core to your product, and you're just taking it to the next step with an existing customer base, existing market, or are you advancing forward into more adjacencies where you're looking to expand and go into different markets? And then in this other category of transformational, where it's different market, new customer segments, and a whole new product area. How can M&A change the trajectory? And there's also different choices. Do we build it in-house? Do we go out and buy it? And so that's what leads us to this conversation, which is perhaps it's worth taking a look at the strategy for acquisition. Next, please. But of course, there's challenges. So another article talks about M&A being very challenging and that 80% of acquisitions fail, and that acquisitions and M&A are a mugs game, which means, you play, if you've ever seen those games in New York, for example, and you pretty much are always going to lose. So is M&A a mugs game? How can we change course on that? If we are looking to be acquired, how do we make sure that the deal is successful? If we're looking to buy a business and integrate, how do we make sure it's successful? The key is to really articulate the value creation strategies going in. Next, please. So what are some types of acquisitions and some motivators? Let's spend a little moment on that because I think it helps answer the questions about how might we make it successful. And so there's 5 different examples here, and I'll walk through each of them briefly. The first one being speculation. So when one company, a larger company, wants to acquire another because they want to speculate that particular something special about that, it's going to help them really differentiate, perhaps transform. One example is Facebook buying Instagram. At the time, Instagram, there was no market for what they were doing. And it was a small, 8-person shop, I think, at the time. And Facebook speculated, and it was a great bet, definitely paying off for them. Another example is Facebook's acquisition of WhatsApp. In the value creation category, a company is looking to improve the performance of the company that's acquiring, turn it around, and increase its value, benefit from that, and also create value for its customers. A great example here is Dropbox buying HelloSign because it helps provide different services within the Dropbox platform. Another example is Google buying Android, which really helped them take that Android platform to a whole other level. The third category is consolidating. And in consolidating examples, someone is looking to remove competition from a very crowded market. And one example of this would be Walmart's acquisition of Flipkart. In the resource acquiring category, there's a number of different ways companies can acquire skills and market position and maybe technology rather than developing internally. Particularly on the talent side, there's a term called acqui-hire. And that can be a very effective strategy where, especially if you're acquiring technical skills that you would be challenged to start up as a corporate startup on your own. And then last but not least is accelerating. So how can a company accelerate its market position in a very competitive industry? And so M&A can be a very strategic move. And I think it dovetails really well with where our next speakers are going to talk about, because in this last one in particular, we're looking for opportunities for cross-selling. We're looking for opportunities to enter those new markets. And so how can we leverage the sales database that we have, our customer database, the more The more organized it is, the more put together it is, then the benefit that you can reap on not only as the selling entity, but also on the buying side and when you're integrating in forward. Next, please. So what are some ways to maximize the impact of these strategic acquisitions? I want to tee up this big idea. It's inspired by Adam Grant, who wrote a book called Give and Take. And one of the main themes in that book is that if the more you give, the more you're able to then benefit from. And if we take that philosophy and apply it into M&A, what that shows me is this potential as the acquiring company for the company that you're looking to integrate into your platform. What are you bringing to the table to them? So often we think about it the other way, right? We're doing our financials, we're understanding what the value is, we're looking forward and all of those things. How do we integrate in a smart way? But a key strategic thought here is, what are you bringing to them? So are you bringing in more growth capital? Are you helping to balance managerial oversight and independence? How do you think about integrating them into the organization? When it comes to human capital, how are we looking to integrate and transfer those valuable skills that you've acquired? And then last but not least, the capabilities and cross-marketing is super important. And one thing that we probably will spend some time on today is around competition. What if one competitor is buying another, particularly in a consolidating market? These teams used to be enemies, now they have to work together, and we're going to be consolidating our sales databases in particular and thinking about how we go to market together, how we brand. But what is one bringing to the other, and how do we think through some of these challenges? So I don't have the answers for you, I'm just prompting the questions. And so the last slide for me is, again, leaving you with this thought that to succeed, what we need to be focused on in an acquisition is, what is the acquiring company going to bring to the entity as it looks to increase its value as one entity over time. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Laurie is an absolute expert. She's a wonderful person to know and an absolute scholar. So please do. I put her information in the chat. Reach out to her with any questions you have. If you'd like to work with her or just, maybe shoot her a question, please do. So now we're going to hear from our Salesforce experts. So we are super excited to have them on as well. So they're going to be talking about success and pitfalls in M&A events, which are a huge part of M&A. So Shannon and Natalie, please take it away.
Great. Thanks so much, Laurie. And thank you, Andrew. Natalie and I are so excited to talk to everybody about this subject today, because even if you aren't planning to make an acquisition or be acquired in the next 12 months, the tips we're going to give you are just good for Salesforce in general. So Natalie and I found that in both of our histories, prior to us working together, we had a lot of experience integrating Salesforce orgs, and not just Salesforce instances, but also the organizations like Laurie was talking about. If you've got people who are selling against each other and all of a sudden they're now working together, how do you take those things and smooth them out so that you've got a really good go-to-market plan that does not interfere with quota retirement, because that is super important, and doesn't interfere with your day-to-day sales operations, the operations of your sales teams. When Natalie and I first started working together, we immediately were faced with a giant Salesforce org merge, and we've got several clients, a couple handfuls of clients who are involved in this sort of thing right now. So as we started putting a punch list together to say, just from the Salesforce side, these are the things that you should start to consider as you're thinking about integrating Salesforce orgs, we recognized that we needed somebody to set the table first. So I was really glad that Laurie could join us today, because she really is an expert in this. And I've seen her present before, and I was so pleased when she said, yes, I'd be happy to join you. She truly is an expert and scholar on this subject. Natalie and I work for Cloud Adoption Solutions, which is a woman-owned Salesforce partner. Our primary focus is on optimization and adoption. Do we do the tech stuff? We sure do. But we always want to know, how do you begin with the end in mind? What is it that you're trying to get to, so we can make sure that you're doing the right thing when you're getting there? So Natalie and I are really focused on making sure that your outcomes are where they need to be. And we've got some things to present to you today that will be really good tips if you're involved in the build, buy, partner piece of M&A that says, here we are, it's time for us to integrate all of the things that we're doing. I do want to note that what we're telling you references really integrating Salesforce orgs, but we could be talking about any CRM system. So these tips that we're going to give you, we spend most of our time in Salesforce. And as you know, 99 of the Fortune 100 use Salesforce. It's pretty ubiquitous. But if you're using Dynamics or Sugar or Zoho, these tips will also work. So we're going to give you a few things today that I think are going to be really fun to hear about. So Natalie is going to give you some of the technical specifics, and then I'm going to give you the color around it. And so we're really starting to think about in using this idea of the diamond, which is now people, process, and technology, because you've got to think about all of them. When Laurie said, sometimes you'll acquire a competitor and your go-to-market strategy might be different, or maybe one of the ways you made yourselves different in the market was to set up some negative selling against your competitor. You want to think about all of those things. We urge you to think about all of those things, but we're going to focus specifically on the Salesforce technology today. So Natalie, how can you make sure that your Salesforce documentation is sellable?
Thanks, Shannon. So the one thing to keep in mind when we're reviewing these tips is just to know that it's not just for an M&A event, but these things you should be already doing in your org. Or if you're not, then maybe you want to start with a cadence of doing some of these categories. The first one being documentation. So we see lots of lack of documentation across orgs. And there are a couple different places where you can actually do documentation when it comes to opportunity, pipeline management, lead conversion. So not only do you have the technical side of it where you can use help text in order to allocate where your stages should be, you can use the path along any of your objects to indicate how to move from one stage to another. And so it doesn't necessarily mean that your documentation needs to be a literal Word document that says stage 1 equals this, stage 2 equals that, even though that would be very helpful. There just are a different level of ways that you can actually document within your Salesforce org. Typically, if you don't have anything listed as far as how the lead conversion process is, for example, who converts that lead into an opportunity? Where is the handoff? If that is outlined, not only will that help a new hire or an existing sales team, but it also looks to the acquirer to say, okay, this company knows how to manage pipeline. They know where their conversations start and where they end. So I would say, as long as you're having some kind of mechanism in the architecture, even if it's something as simple as requiring a loss reason when you lost your opportunities. If your acquirer comes to you and says, run a report of all the deals you lost last month, and I want to know why, and you don't have that information, you could easily set a field requirement that says, opportunity went to close lost. I need to make a requirement that says, please tell me why it was lost. And then you have that data. So Shannon, I know you've run into this in many different occasions, and it's sometimes the simplest little tweaks can help us get there.
It really is. I was working with a company that made 6 acquisitions in 1 year, and every one of the companies that they acquired had a Salesforce instance. And in these cases, one of the things that I encouraged them to do was go back to your initial implementation. See if you've got implementation notes. See if you've got some ideas behind why you have so many sales stages. Because as you're sitting down at this table, and you'll remember, we're not talking today about necessarily the people and the process, but the technology. So when you're dancing around those high emotions, because emotions are so high during one of these events, you want to be able to look at this documentation and use that as an emotion-free zone. So if the acquiring company has 7 sales stages and the company that's being acquired has 9, you want to be able to sit down and almost do a value stream map that says, okay, what does this stage mean to you? How did you define this stage when you put it into play? How do you define it when you train somebody new? So looking at that documentation to understand, what do you mean when you say stage 2? And is that the same thing as my stage 3? Or do we have to make some edits to the acquiring org? So understanding how that's going to line up if you're having a parent and child sort of integration, so that when they come together, you know if you have to audit or change any of your sales stages. Because let's be honest, Good line of sight into pipeline is going to get you a higher return if you're the company being acquired, right? So if you can say, I can tell you with confidence, this is what my pipeline looks like for the next 6 quarters based on our typical selling cycle and the way that we record things in Salesforce, boom, you're going to get a higher return than the company that says, I only have confidence in my pipeline for the next 3 quarters. So making sure that that documentation is in place, that you've got clear identification. So during the due diligence process, the company that's making the acquisition can see the how and the why behind your documentation. So that one's no one's favorite. Nobody loves documentation, and that's okay, but it's something to really set your focus on. Natalie, our next tip, though, is really talking about data hygiene.
Yes, so clean data is king. And I will repeat that, clean data is king. And the reason why, you're being acquired and you have John Smith listed as a contact 15 times. That org is going to say, oh my gosh, what do we have here? And what about the rest of the org? So putting ways into place where you have a report that brings you past due close dates on your opportunities, past due close dates on your tasks. Even if you just set these up with a weekly cadence to send these out to your sales team, that is a great first start. Another way to look at your data across the org is one of my personal favorites is using an app called Field Trip. And I got that off of the App Exchange. It's a free app you install in the org, and it basically measures the usage of all of your fields against all of your objects. And it tells you whether or not they're being used, the percentage of use, if it's required, if it's a custom field. So it lets you take a view holistically against all the fields. You can run this report every month. You can take a look to see, where do I need to remove things? If you see the fields not being used, ask yourself why, ask yourself who created it, take a look to see if there's any documentation around it. The other place that you'd like to do some hygiene is reports and dashboards themselves. So there's a way to run a report of reports, and this will let you see who created your reports, who last ran them, when they were last run. If you don't have a report that's been run in the last 6 to 9 months, you may want to delete it, you may want to archive it. Same with your dashboards. If your dashboards haven't been refreshed in a long time, you have to ask yourself, are they being used? If they're not being used, maybe go back to the creator and say, hey, is there anything on here we can tweak to make sure that people are actually using the dashboard? If they're not using them, get rid of them, or archive them if you really need to hold on to them. Sometimes people can't just delete, and I'm one of those people at times. So just taking a look at reports, dashboards, your field usage, implement your duplicate rules. So Salesforce gives you native duplicate rules, and just turn them on and see what happens. There are obviously other third-party tools that can get more complex with looking at your duplicates and how to cleanse them. But take advantage of the tools that Salesforce natively gives you, and that way you can have some type of interaction with the data, at a monthly or quarterly level.
When I was 16, I was driving down Armour Boulevard in Forest Hills, and there was a salon on the corner called Fazio's, and they had a giant sign that said, looking for a hairdresser, must bring own book of business. And I thought, well, if somebody has their own book of business, why do they have to come to your salon? And this story has always stuck with me, because several years later, when I was about 35, I was helping a company that was acquiring another organization. And I realized the organization they were acquiring didn't have any evidence of a book of potential business. So they didn't capture accounts. They captured accounts. They did not capture contacts and leads. And so one of the things that the acquiring organization said, what do you think? We're just going to call up and say, may I speak to Mr. AstraZeneca? Where is the person who is the director of clinical research? Who is the person that is the director of supply chain? And so one of the things that you have to think about is your data approach, your general data approach. If you're the acquiring company, you want to dig down into that data during your due diligence, because that's one of the places where you're looking for that value creation. This is one of the things that Laurie talks about a ton on her podcast and in the things that she puts out. How do you create that value? And I'm begging you, if you're on either side in the Salesforce instance, is to look and say, where do I have holes in my data? So one of the ways that this organization in particular I'm talking about tried to solve that was putting in a bunch of required fields. Well, when you suddenly introduce a bunch of required fields to salespeople and say, you can't save this opportunity until you fill all of these things in, we all know what's going to happen. Sometimes they just put in some data so that they can save it and move along with their day. So thinking about data in a constant iterative way is really important. Thinking about data hygiene one time as a one-time event is a never. So roll your sleeves up, dig down, get inside of that, and make sure that you've got a standard for data hygiene so that if you're the organization that's going to be acquired, you can meet maximum value. And if you're making the acquisition, you can make sure that you're buying the product you want whenever you acquire this company. So one of the ways that you can make sure that your data hygiene is up to place is to have a governance and strategy in place. And so Natalie and I see a lot of times that organizations don't have a good, focused, or outlined sales technology governance plan. Natalie, why don't you tell us a little bit about the technical side here?
So this is probably the least favorite part as an admin, is the not fun part, right? The governance over the actual org and architecture. So we're talking about sandboxes. We're talking about, critical updates, which are now called releases, your installed packages, your integrations. So one thing that I recommend for most admins is, number one, make sure you're using your sandboxes. If not, build them and use them for testing and for training. Create a sandbox refresh schedule. I can't tell you how many orgs I've been in that their sandboxes haven't been refreshed in years. And then if you go into them and it's not only old data, but it's old architecture. So a pick list field, which exists in your production environment, doesn't exist in the sandbox because you haven't refreshed it. You're going to run into that times 1,000. Release management, which used to be called critical updates. So this is a little bit different than the releases that Salesforce puts out 3 times a year. This is the security features that get pushed into the org. Salesforce lets you know about them and gives you the opportunity to test your org out before they push them live. So taking a look at your release management schedule. I think the next couple of updates are for July and September. So you'll want to go into your setup menu and check out to see what things are going to be pushed in those months and do some testing. Another thing you can look at is your installed packages. If you're not using them, they're taking up space, get rid of them. Take a look to see when they were installed, and if they're expired, click the uninstall button and just go through that short, quick process to get them out. Also, taking a look at anything that you have connected to the org from an integration perspective. Are you still using it? Is there a bidirectional sync? If you don't have to connect to something, then don't. So just make sure you're evaluating these things like on a monthly or quarterly basis, just to make sure that your architecture and you have some type of governance in place when it comes to the org in that matter.
We worked with an organization in the healthcare IT space who asked us to create a governance plan for them. And I'm going to tell you very quickly how you can do this exact same thing in your organization. One, they had a Salesforce governance meeting once a month. It was on the first Friday of the month, and it was at 8 o'clock in the morning, and they brought donuts. For the people who couldn't be there, they always sent them fun things to say, like, please come to this meeting. And they thought about everybody who was adjacent to Salesforce, not necessarily the users, but people in finance who wanted information into their ERP system, people in operations who were looking for operational resource planning. So having that sort of governance meeting where you can get together with people who may see things that you don't is critical, imperative, and really, really helpful. So having that sort of governance strategy, and again, having the documentation to stand behind it, will make the acquiring organization's eyes light up. They'll probably say, we don't even have something that's good. We want to buy you so that we can have the same exact sort of approach, and we want you to head it up. Our last tip in Sellable before we get into the pitfalls, and the pitfalls are where the scary stories come out, is your Salesforce architecture hygiene. So Natalie's going to tell you how and why you should have hygiene around your Salesforce architecture.
Yeah, so this is an area where you can see, for example, an account with 10 different record types, or your opportunities. There's 10 record types, 15-page layouts. Typically, you want to have a one-to-one relationship between those, but ask yourself, why do I have so many record types and page layouts? What was the purpose for creating them? And you can easily find out if your record types are being used by running a report and grouping it by the record type. So if you have an account report and you want to see if all those 10 record types are being used, you can pull in all the accounts, group it by the record type, and find out in that manner. The other thing that we want to do from an architecture standpoint is related to your workflow rules and your process builder. So Salesforce continues to tell us that they're sunsetting, workflow rules and to push us towards process builder and flow. So take a look at your workflow rules, try and convert them into process builder. But in doing so, keep in mind, best practice for process builders is to have a single object per process. So if you have accounts and you have any automations related to your accounts, make sure they're all bucketed under that one process. I've seen many orgs where there are 15 process builders for the account and 5 process builders related to contacts. So it helps the admin keep things a little bit tidy. But when we say architecture hygiene, this is what we're referring to: validation rules, automation, record types, and page layouts. Anytime you are working with these types of things, like we said in the past, document. There are places on all of these records where you can write in a description that says why the record type was created, why the page layout exists, why the process builder was built. So just keep that in mind, the theme of documentation across all of these sellable topics.
We worked with an organization who was looking to be acquired, and we outlined their architecture. But first we did an architecture audit, and we found they had 200 users who every single one had administrative rights. They all had admin access. So they all had access to do anything they wanted to in that Salesforce org, which could mean one disgruntled employee could go in, download everything inside of that CRM system, close off everybody's access. They could do anything they wanted to. So the first thing we said is, let's get your house in order. Let's put some keys in this lock on this front door to make sure that we can tidy that down. And then let's put together an architecture document. And as an acquiring company, you should ask for an architecture documentation or a demo or a tour to say, the same way you would if you were buying a new house. Take me through and let me see it. I want to know if there's termites in the basement, right? There are probably termites in your Salesforce basement, and that's okay. But if you can feel that you're moving inside of an M&A event, getting your architecture in place and being able to display how this foundation is really strong and everything you've got on top of it is built that way, it will immediately move your X up to a place that is going to be more pleasant for you as the company that's being acquired. And it will also give you more freedom when you're looking to integrate things. So here is really important for you to think about that sort of company that says, well, we started small and here's what we got to. Now 200 people have all the admin access they want to because we never revisited the architecture. That is a scary place, which is a great segue for us to move into our 4 primary pitfalls. We're going to run through these pretty quickly because scary stories are scary. But the 4 that we're going to talk about are customizations, insufficient backups, inconsistency, and no change management. So Natalie, I think you're going to talk about customizations and how this can be a major pitfall during an M&A event.
Yeah, so let's think about this as there's 2 orgs, org 1 and org 2. Org 1 has their own profiles, org 2 has their own profiles. Same with permission sets and sharing rules. So what you have to think about is the visibility and access that the new org is going to have, their surviving org. So if you have org 2 and they can see every record, they can see every field because they have a public read-write org-wide sharing setting, and org 1 is private. So you have to add sharing rules for people to be able to see certain things. This couldn't be more different, night and day. So conversation definitely has to take place to determine what are the go forward profiles going to be, what are the permissions going to be for the users, and what are the sharing rules going to be, because too many times this conversation does not happen. And then on rollout day, you have a user coming to you and saying, I can't see this field, I can't see this account. And you got to backtrack, figure out why, have a conversation, get permission to fix it. So that's definitely one of the stickier ones.
We saw an organization who had over customized. And so this is another thing that I would encourage you to look at. This could be a primary pitfall. So they renamed every single field in their Salesforce org, and everything was named something that was really specific to the vernacular of their organization. Well, that company was being acquired. So the acquiring company had 30 days to do due diligence. They wanted to put together a field-to-field mapping to say, how quickly can we get our Salesforce orgs integrated, because there was going to be some redundancy in the sales team. So in order for them to reach their value quickly, they knew that they only had 90 days to do that from the minute they signed that contract. And so when the field-to-field mapping was being done, we had a really hard time to say, okay, we understand what it means on this side when you're saying first name, but on this side, we have no idea what it means when they say, we can't make these assumptions. And it really slowed down the process. So as they were doing that 30-day evaluation, they weren't able to quickly say, okay, this makes sense. Your Salesforce org is close to something that we can understand. So beware of over customizing, because it is something that all of us are tempted to do inside of Salesforce orgs because it's easy to do so. Natalie, the data backups, this one feels like I actually want to close my eyes while you're talking about this. That's how scary this is to me.
If you can answer the question, do I have a disaster recovery plan, with a yes, then you're already ahead of the game. 9 times out of 10, that question is no when I've asked amongst admins. Data backup and disaster recovery sometimes falls to IT. And if that's how your company runs, that's great. IT is going to help you out with that. But many times IT doesn't want any parts of Salesforce, and they let you handle it. And then you're stuck with backing up all of your data. Okay, so how do I do that? What if org 1 uses an awesome third-party tool to do all of their backups on a weekly basis so that they have consistency and replication and redundancy? What if org 2 either has no plan, or they could use the native tools that Salesforce provides, which are pretty manual? If you ask me, I had to do it. Trust me, you don't want to do it that way. But just thinking about the differences between org 1 and org 2, there obviously will need to be a conversation with how is the go forward process going to look as far as backing up your data. There should be something done on a at least weekly or monthly basis when it comes to the data backup. Both your sandbox and production environments need to be backed up. So if you haven't begun to think about those things, it's definitely an area that needs attention.
It really is. That part is so scary. So that is something that is a major pitfall for companies that are being acquired when they have insufficient data backups or no proof that they have a disaster recovery plan. One of the other things that we see all the time is inconsistency. And so I want to ask you to think of 3 little words, everybody. Marketing qualified lead. What's a marketing qualified lead to you? I know everybody who's listening right now says, I have the answer. I know what a marketing qualified lead is. Guess what? It means something a little different to every organization, right? So the idea of an MQL might be really specific and clear to you. And we may be sitting down in a planning meeting to say, how are we going to merge your org with this other org? And you say, what happens after MQLs? MQLs move into SQL. Okay. What triggers that? What goes into that? How do you qualify that? How do you report on that? And I will tell you that we've seen in many places, MQL is one everybody sort of understands. You're dealing with multiple different competing priorities here. Not only do you have the 2 organizations, the one who's making the acquisition and the one who's being acquired, you've got departments that traditionally don't always get along. Marketing and sales live in their little silos, right? Marketing has their goals and sales has their goals. So you might have 4 different definitions for MQL. That makes your org merge really challenging. So looking at that jargon or vernacular to say, How can we make sure this is consistent, that we are saying the same thing and we mean the same thing in our organization? So when we sit down with this other organization, we can make sure that we have consistency when we're discussing these things together. Natalie, I know you've seen this as well in other places, not just at MQLs, but that's one that always gives me the shivers down my spine.
The scary part of that is that some companies don't use leads at all. So what if org 2 doesn't use leads, org 1 does? That is a huge process question. So that to me says, okay, so if the org doesn't use leads, they use opportunities right away, and maybe their first stage acts as a lead gen type situation. So process alone, not even using a lead, leads you to a larger conversation. And that kind of leads into the automation piece. So let's say that you are finally at the point where your opportunity goes to close one. There are some orgs where the users can change it to closed one, because then it sets off a triggering effect of post sales implementation, notifications go out, project teams get set up. So org 1 has automation set up for whenever they win a deal. Org 2 has all of that activity taking place outside of Salesforce. So that's a conversation that needs to happen as far as, okay, where can we automate this? How can we take out the manualness of closing one and then sending an email to the project management team? This opportunity was just one, send. Okay, finance, this was sent. So we could automate that. That can all be automated in Salesforce as far as, triggering notifications. So taking a look across inconsistency, it's a large conversation against fields, objects, you name it.
Our last pitfall before we get into questions is no plan for redundancy and change management. These are two giant issues that we have seen with literally every org merge we've done. So you have to make sure there's a plan for redundancy. So if you know that you're going to spend 30 days technically integrating the organizations, how are you going to make sure that the sales activity will not be disrupted? So you don't want to take your whole sales floor at once and train them on the new system, because then nobody's making any prospecting calls, and you're going to feel that in your pipeline 3 quarters from now. So how do you make sure that you've got redundancy, not only in technology, but also in process? And then the change management to say, hey, look, we've got customers to sell to, we've got customers to service, and we want to make sure that can continue while you're getting your feelers around to understand what it is you're going to do next. So we worked with a really large organization who was moving from a combination of manual, and I mean literally paper processes in order to sell and service, and some, I think, a little bit of technology. And they were moving to this new organization while they were also acquiring an organization. And so one of the things that we said up front is like, yes, we've got all this technology that we've got to launch and we've got to get out there, but how are you going to manage the redundancy and the change management so that everybody can be trained, feel comfortable, understand what it is they're doing, and they can feel supported during that process? So a lot of organizations take this sort of idea that if you build it, they will come. We'll give you this new Salesforce org, and it's all going to work for you, and everybody's going to do it because it's their job, and you don't get any commission unless it's in Salesforce. Well, that's all good and fine, except a lot of times when people are involved in an acquisition activity, Laurie told you earlier, 80% of acquisitions fail. This is a time where a lot of people they have uncertain expectations. They don't know how to control their emotions. Will their job be cut? Should they be dusting off their resume? So if there's not a change management plan, that's going to impact your technology adoption strategy immediately and may cause you to have some brain drain that was unintended during that acquisition.
The one thing I just want to quickly add to that is going back to our org examples. So org 1, org 2. So the initial conversation should be, are we keeping org 1? Are we keeping org 2? Or are we going to spin up org 3? So think about who's going to be the survivor, who's going to be the parent, or if you're going to create a brand new org, that's also one way to make sure that both orgs are still running up until the point where you flip the switch. So That conversation has to happen first so that the build can take place.
Great tip. Andrew, we're going to turn it over to you to see if we've got any questions. I know you've been monitoring the chat.
Yeah, well, thank you first, so much. What an amazing, panel of experts to hear from. So that was absolutely excellent. Thank you so much. We did have two come in through the Q&A portion, which I can view. So I'll go ahead and throw it out there, and you guys can answer it. So the first question is, who needs to be involved in this process from each company?
Laurie, do you want to take that one first? And then Natalie, you could talk about technically for Salesforce.
Yeah, so I guess if the question about the process, we have to define the processes. What's the beginning? What's the end? I mean, my mind immediately goes to, well, are we negotiating? Are we done the deal? Are we in due diligence? Is it closed? So I guess if we take it that the deal is closed and now we want to make it successful, who would be involved really depends on the organization and complexity. Typically, there is on the deal side, let's say I can even talk from my own experience. I mean, we were at the management team, we were a company getting acquired, and there were, the management team was sizable and we were a large organization. So I know that's not always the case, but we call it the management team, people involved in the due diligence process. We were the ones providing information to the acquiring company. We had signed NDAs. We weren't allowed to talk about it in the company outside of anyone else who had signed an NDA, and it was a very closed group. And so in the due diligence process, if you're part of that, you obviously have to keep things very close and confidential, but at the same time, you're trying to put on the best but you're trying to put the best foot forward to show the value of your company. After the deal, then typically what you'll see, and especially in larger organizations, is an integration team that's created. And typically there again, depending on the size of the complexity of the companies, you'll probably have that team led by the acquiring company and including really key leaders, influencers of the company that's now being integrated. And we had created a steering committee, which was really valuable. It was made up of executives and key leaders. And we had mapped out a playbook for how we were going to do the integration, which has started with some of the back office processes around HR and finance. And then of course, the Salesforce integration. So I'll turn it over to you guys.
Sure, I love that you say integration team, Laurie, because that's exactly what is needed from a Salesforce perspective. So first and foremost, you need your Salesforce administrator. They're probably one of the most important individuals that needs to be part of this whole process. A project manager to handle, the day-to-day, and then think about all of the users who are going to be in the Salesforce instance. A representative from each department should be involved in UAT, in creating new processes, in confirming processes. So I would say Salesforce admin, your project manager, maybe a partner to help guide the project manager and the Salesforce administrator, and then a representative from each department who is going to act as a user for the system.
That's great. One of the things we know about academic change management theory is that you want to look for those quick wins. So how you can get those quick wins, and UAT is a great time and place to do that, because the people you have who are doing the user acceptance testing will tell their friends. I tried it out, it works. It's maybe even a little better than what we had. That's awesome. Good question.
Great, yeah, thank you so much. Quick wins are awesome. I know our attendees are probably agreeing with you. So we just have one more, so I'll mark that as answered. And so the next question is, what if the acquiring company has Salesforce and the acquired company has Microsoft Dynamics?
You want to handle that, Natalie?
Yeah, I would say the first conversation that needs to take place is to determine the system of record going forward. So if there's two different systems, depending on, financially, which system is going to be more feasible for the surviving group, select a system. And then you can get into developing a transition strategy. So all the process mapping that we spoke about, the terminology conversations, the jargon, a communication strategy. So making sure that everyone knows what is happening along the way. Licensing. So you'll have to figure out what system is being retained and if you need more licenses for that system. Lastly is something that's very important and sometimes forgotten, and it's the physical and emotional transition. So keeping in mind the people who are being acquired, so the users who are going through this either blindly or not, they're the ones who are going to have to be using the system, and they're the ones that we want to, increase usage, increase adoption to make the system successful.
I love that. I love that question. And I think this all comes down to understanding who's sitting at the table and who needs a seat at the table. And, Salesforce, Microsoft Dynamics, they all serve the same purpose, but making sure that you've got somebody who can represent the interests of the company moving forward. Again, beginning with the end in mind, where is it that you want to go? That will help you to drive that.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. You guys were absolutely excellent. I mean, an incredible all-star, panelists. So thank you everybody for attending. We're so happy to have you here. As you can see, these are 2 emails that you can reach out to our wonderful panelists at. I also dropped their LinkedIn bios and their information in the chat as well. So we'll go ahead and give you guys 15 seconds to go ahead and copy and paste that. But on behalf of Cloud Adoption Solutions, I'd like to say thank you so much for attending. Thank you to our wonderful panelists, and we just had a really great time. Thank you so much.
Yeah, make sure you reach out to us. Laurie's got she's got an offer for everybody who attended today, as do we. Laurie, do you want to give a quick overview of the offer that you've got for our attendees?
Yeah, happy to. I work with business owners that are contemplating a future transition, whether it's a succession to the next generation of managers, or they're contemplating a transition of an exit, like we've been talking about here with mergers and acquisitions. So if you know of a business owner that might be contemplating selling their business or buying a business, please reach out to me. I'd love to talk to them. Also, please connect with me and listen to Succession Stories podcast. It's available wherever you listen to podcasts, and would love for you to follow the show. And also, please connect with me on LinkedIn. Would love to hear from you. The other offer, thanks also Shannon for mentioning, is for business owners who are looking to understand the value of their company today and what it might be worth. I will take time with you to go through an assessment and also an estimate of value. So that's available for people who connect with me at my email, lbarkman@small.big.com. Thanks so much.
Thank you. And Natalie and I would also like to offer, if anybody would like a gap analysis, which is our personal overview of your Salesforce org with the eye for M&A, we are very happy to give that to you, and you can use that as a roadmap to your future. It's a great time to do it. Now is the time, even if now is not the time for your event, because getting everything ready takes a little bit longer than you think. Andrew, you want to take us home?
Yeah, thank you guys so much. Those are excellent offers. And, first, I just want to say thank you to our attendees. We know that you're very busy and that this post-pandemic time is very hectic with lots of meetings and webinars. So thank you for spending some time with us today. And panelists, you guys were incredible. Thank you so much for being here, and just have a great rest of your day. Bye, everyone.